Well, you can't get something out of nothing, right? That's not the way existence works. That's not the way existence works. In order for a thing to exist, or a sum of a thing to have manifested before you, the ingredients of said thing must have first existed.
Exactly.
In some shape, some form, some state, they existed. Which is really what creation is. Creation is growth from one state into another, right? Which is why when you trace back the root of that word etymologically, you're going to find words such as growth. Yes. Yeah, you taught me that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to teach etymology back in the day.
See, I was paying attention.
You knew the words you heard.
I remember that. That was a good 6 years ago. You said that. It stayed there. So, yeah, when you trace back the root of the word creation, you're going to find words like growth. So that's what creation is, growth from one state into another. And when you think of creation, think of anything being created. That's really what it is. It's a change from one state into another. So when you deal with physical creation, it's no different. It's no different. This physical world, this physical universe, the ingredients must have first been there for this world to exist. So let's give them some Sabaean science. There's a book called Existence, How and Why.
Your favourite book.
My favourite book. And I'm going to keep telling you, I'm going to keep telling the world, it's my favourite book. Written by Baba Yanun, obviously. And in that book, he walks us through physical creation and he gets us thinking of those words differently, something and nothing. Mm-hmm. So something essentially is a sum of a thing, okay? It amounts, we can weigh it, we can measure it on this physical side of existence. It's amounted to something, So that's that hydrogen atom, really that being the first stage or step of that, if you like. Okay, the hydrogen atom, it has physical weight. Mm-hmm. Nothing is really a thing that we can't measure or weigh on this side of existence. But that's not to say that it doesn't exist. We just can't measure it here. Our instruments can't measure it, if that makes sense. Although, they're doing some things now these days where they're diving beneath the atom and so on and so forth. Me and Retu were talking about that actually a couple of days ago.
Yeah, you were.
So yeah, so that's really what nothing is. It's a thing or no thing, but it hasn't amounted to anything physically. It hasn't summed up here where we can measure it or weigh it, but it is there. So that's essentially what the ingredients are for this physical world. So if you read Existence, How and Why, what Baba Yanun explains is that nothing or that emptiness physically was really etherical particles, which is the other side of existence, right? So you had positive and negative etherical particles, which came together at that point to form what you would call that Big Bang, if that makes sense. So positive, negative etherical particles come together to form a point of singularity, an explosion, if you like, of physical elements or physical chemicals, hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, so on and so forth. So in order for that explosion to take place of atomic elements, the etherical particles on the other side provided that. The etherical particles were the ingredients for that Big Bang, if that makes sense. And what Baba Yanun explains is that Big Bang, it starts at a point of singularity, right? And in our tones, we call it Pa Hamem Nakat, which translates to the black dot. Mm-hmm. And that black dot is the first point of matter. That's from which all else came. So if you need simplicity, let's think of our universe, our physical universe. There would have been a black dot at the birth of our physical universe. And all else in the universe came from that point of singularity. And the science of the black dots, the science is a heavy science. Because essentially you're dealing with an entity, a wormhole, if you like, that sits right between that point of energy and matter, of etherical energy and physical matter. It sits right at that point. It's bringing in, if you like, etherical energy into this physical world, if that makes sense. So that's Existence, How and Why. I recommend that if you're going to read Existence, How and Why, and you're dealing with the science of the black dots, also read a Master Secret scroll called The Black Dot. Mm-hmm. And it's a scroll, I think it's probably 3 titles in one physical book. And The Black Dot is probably the first book in that scroll. And it's probably maybe 5 pages long. You can just zoom through that, and it's deep. And he deals with the science of the dots and just how magical they are. So if we go across to the human body, and by the way, we should always do that. We're dealing with universe, atoms, solar systems, bodies, cells. These things all correspond. So there's always going to be links into the way they work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's what you all used to say in class. If it's happening in the microcosm, it's happening in the macrocosm.
There you go. There you go. So in dealing with the physical universe, we've dealt with black dots, that first point of singularity, that dot that sits between matter and energy, i.e. bringing in from another realm into this one, if that makes sense. What's deep about the science of the dots is that in the black dot scroll, Baba Yanun explains that, okay, how do we work as human beings, our nervous system, if you like, in order for us to do any physical activity, even if it's simple as lifting your arm, you need to first think that. So the thought is the first point. When you think it, if I think, let me lift my arm right now, that's going to trigger a motor neuron. Neuron's going to be fired. It's going to, chemical waves are going to go along what they might call axons if you study the nervous system. And when it gets to the synapse, or synapse, because I think it's pronounced different ways.
Yeah, depending on what country you're from.
Yeah, depending on what country you're from, it's pronounced different ways. But when you get to the synapse, which is essentially gaps between the cells, it sends out a chemical. And so if I think to lift my arm, essentially I'm going to think that motor neuron is going to be fired. It's going to fire a chemical, what you might call a neurotransmitter, in order to trigger that. Eventually those neurotransmitters get to my arms, triggers the muscles, I lift my arm. That's how your nervous system works. So what Baba Yanun explains is that between those synapses are essentially junctions between your cells. So that's how you're making it all the way down from that point of thought, all the way down to your arm, for example. You're traveling along these junctions, if that makes sense. Between these junctions, obviously, are, as I mentioned, neurotransmitters, or what Baba Yanun calls brain etheric seeds. And what he explains is that black dots can be assimilated to become a part of that system. So you can have black dots sitting in between those junctions, between your cells, which essentially means that the same way you're dealing with in physical creation, whereby you're bringing something from another realm into this one, you can do that in your mind, in your mental. When I read that, I was like, what? Mind was blown. Because essentially it means you can bring in that which is divine in your very mind, because you have dots that sit and can be a part of your system. So divine reasoning, divine thought, divine ideas, divine imagination, so on and so forth. The possibilities are endless. And so it's a reminder that also that thought does not originate in the brain.
Yeah.
That is a physical tool which you use while you're in this state of existence. But when you transition from this realm, you will still be able to think on where you want. Just I can't think.
Don't have my brain no
Yeah,
more. It's gone.
my brain, it's gone.
It's over.
Can't operate. So that's not where thought originates. So the fact that these black dots sit in your mind and you're capable of... I recommend you read the scroll, because Baba Yanun goes into
I remember when he broke that down.
Yeah, it's deep. Mind-blowing.
Mind blown.
Pun intended.
Excuse the pun.
Excuse the pun. But mind blown, because you're essentially saying, okay, and he goes into further things. He talks about things such as brain soup, your soup, or the water within your brain hitting the right temperature to allow you to reason, to allow you to think correctly. And not everyone on the planet can do it, which is why certain people just seem so unreasonable. Certain groups of people, if you look historically, are going to seem unreasonable in their actions. So not everyone is the same, if that makes sense. But those brain etheric seeds, those black dots being a part of your system, he said, the effect can be magical. And it's important as well for us to learn about ourselves beyond the physical body. Let's learn about ourselves spiritually. Let's learn about ourselves mentally, because what we're capable of is so much more than we might think when we're just dealing with the physical realm of existence.
Yeah, and it's not limited to this realm.
No, it's not. It's not. No, it's not. And we're not physical beings by nature. We're soul beings by nature who are having a physical experience. And we have to remember that. You've got to remain aware of that.
I got to tell myself that every day.
Yeah, you got to
living in
yourself.
this world.
It's tough. It's tough.
It's just a blip, just an experience.
Yeah, just an experience. I'm going to go home soon. So yeah, it's important for us to remember that. But I recommend you reading Existence, How and Why. I hope that makes it somewhat clear, or gives you an idea of what we're capable of. But understanding the science of the black dots is very important, and understanding what we're capable of, which I want to dive in more to as well. I want to talk about our soul and our mind and our oversoul and our spirit and all these types of things. Understanding what we're capable of is very important, and what we are as beings and how we operate and how we work. Because what you're going to find is that, science as projected by, certainly in the Western world, not to say they won't have answers to certain things, but it's going to be limited. It's going to be limited. If you want to go beyond this realm, you're going to need something that goes a bit deeper, or a being that can go a bit deeper and explain, okay, this is where you come from, this is what you're capable of, this is what you used to be, this is what you are now, and so on and so forth, and understand that your answers are going to be limited.
Because when you think about it, Western science is the most recent science.
Yeah, there
so
you go.
you have to go back.
You have to go back further. And
to cultures that have been studying much longer.
Much longer. And sort of the modern science, you think, okay, yeah, that's the peak of it. But don't rely on people that arrived on the planet much
after you.
Way after you, to tell you about yourself, to tell you what you're capable of, and even to tell you about the world, because you as a people have been living in this world. When we're talking about Africans and people of African descent, you've been living in it the longest. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to access the knowledge of our ancestors, that's going to go far and beyond what is available in the mainstream now. You're going to have, nothing wrong with starting your research, in the modern, but eventually you have to go back, which is why being like Baba Yanun's here. So he can take us back and make us aware of what's going on, really. But the black dots, study the science of the black dots. It's deep.